Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another speed painting guide. In this video I'm going to be showing you some techniques for quickly painting up the entire chaos side of Shadowspear in the colours of the word bearers. So first, let's discuss some of the key points of speed painting. First of all, limit your colour palette. Keeping the number of paints you're using to a minimum will also reduce the number of steps. You'll find that some colour schemes are better suited to speed painting than others, particularly those that use darker colours. Paint in batches. Painting 10 or 20 miniatures at a time will allow you to get into a rhythm whilst painting them. Painting every mini in your batch before moving on to the next colour will allow you to develop your technique and hasten your painting. Keep things simple. If you're going for a horde of miniatures, chances are those finely detailed highlights will get lost in amongst the rabble. Save your detailed painting to individual characters or centerpiece miniatures and just focus on getting the basic colours down on the rest of your army. So with the key points covered, let's apply them to some Chaos Space Marines. Before we can start to paint, you will need to first prime your miniatures so that the later layers of paint adhere to the plastic better. This also gives us the opportunity to start applying our paint too by opting for a black primer. This black starting colour will serve as what I call the shadow layer. This is a dark layer of paint that will only be visible in the recessed areas once we've painted over it, and will create the effect of shadows. This not only improves realism but also helps to boost the contrast, making those details stand out. For our first step, we're going to be applying a dry brush of Rhinox Hide over the whole of each model. This will serve two purposes. First, we'll achieve the base colour of our leather areas of the model, such as the belts and the holsters. Secondly, the reddish brown of Rhinox Hide will allow our later application of the armour colour to be applied much more easily. However, during the application, we want to preserve that shadow layer I mentioned, so the best way to do this is via dry brushing. Dry brushing involves loading up a fairly large brush with some paint and removing some of the excess onto a tissue or piece of paper until only a small amount of paint remains in the bristles. With your dry brush ready, drag it across the whole miniature. The paint will start to accumulate onto the raised areas, leaving only the black recesses visible. As you can see, this is a very quick and easy step to perform. Leaving the black visible only in the recesses will allow us to avoid having to use washes to bring out those shadows later on, which not only means we don't have to spend time applying the wash, but we can also avoid waiting for it to dry thoroughly before progressing. One thing I like to do whilst dry brushing is to keep my brush ever so slightly damp, as it helps to avoid that dusty texture that can often form. Even though the technique is called dry brushing, having a small amount of moisture in your bristles will give you better results. Also, be sure to rinse out your brushes after painting 4 or 5 of your miniatures in your batch, as this will help to prevent further accumulation of paint in your bristles and will keep your paintbrush workable for longer. Follow the same steps as before, but rather than dry brushing the whole model, instead focus on just the armour panels and bare flesh. Using a smaller brush for this step should help. Don't worry if you do overspill, as we're not too worried about the small mistakes, as these won't be as noticeable once the model is on the tabletop. This dry brushing technique should build up a nice deep red colour across the armour, as well as creating a slightly rough texture, perfect for representing the older, more unkempt armour of the Chaos Space Marines. To finish off the dry brushing, we want to add some silver edging to the metal areas using a dry brushing technique once again. I've opted to use Necron compound for this step, but if you don't have this paint, you could instead use some Ironbreaker. Focus on the edges of the metal parts to create a mixture of brown and silver, giving us an aged, rusty metal effect. For the slimmer areas like the silver armour trim, use a small brush and lightly drag the bristles along the edge to create a quick highlight of silver. After this step, be sure to thoroughly clean out your brushes and change your water to avoid cross-contamination of metal flakes into your other paints. Next, we can start to apply a little colour to our word bearers and also bring out some of the other details, but before we do, we first need to thin out our paint a little. Mix in water in small amounts until your consistency is similar to what you see here. Unlike my other videos, this time we need to thin the paint to make it easy to apply, rather than just giving us a good smooth coverage. The first colour to use in this way is rat skin flesh, and this will be focused mainly over any exposed areas of skin on your models. This means it will be mostly applied to the possessed, obliterators, and the venom crawler, with a couple of helmetless heads too. Apply your thinned paint over these flesh areas, but don't paint the whole area. Just apply some quick brush strokes over raised muscles and flesh, making sure you leave the recesses in the dark red and brown to help boost the contrast and enhance the details. Using the same quick layering method as before, next apply some watered down Zandri Dust to the areas of cloth on your miniatures such as wrappings or the robes of the Master of Possession. Remember to follow the same steps as before, keeping the darker recesses visible. You can also use this paint as a dry brush over the fur found on the Master of Possession's shoulders to pick out all of those individual tufts. With some Karak Stone, pick out the various areas of bone dotted across your word bearers. For the protruding tongues of the Greater Possessed and the Venom Crawler, apply a layer of pink horror. The final areas to paint are the glowing parts of the models, which include the eyes, plasma vents and flames. We want to give all of these areas a base coat of Averland Sunset, however, yellow isn't going to be the final colour. As this is a base coat, mixing in a little water with your paint will make the application much easier. Now that we have that clean yellow base colour, we can now apply a layer of Hexwraith Flame over the top. This will give the areas a bright green coloration, which, if you're familiar with the colour wheel, will contrast nicely against the red armour. And here we have the completed Chaos Demonkin painted in the Wordbearer's scheme. I finished things off by creating a simple basing scheme using some textured paints and some more dry brushing. Now the paint job won't win any awards, but it's a good way of quickly getting your force painted up, and after all it's much better to play with painted models than with half assembled bare plastic. The entire force took me around 11 hours to paint, but this could be sped up further if you're willing to skip a few of the smaller details that I decided to pick out. This would leave you with a perfectly serviceable force that would hit most tournaments' minimum requirements. If you enjoyed the speed painting style of video and would like to see me give the same treatment to other Horde type armies, do let me know in the comments below. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video as well. If you have any questions or just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. So the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.